Bootstrap.css includes many classes that you can use to style forms. Two of those classes are named hasSuccess and hasError. The idea behind these classes is that you can apply them to a DOM element, and inside the element, those classes will change the appearance of label text and help text to signify if something has an error or if it has success. With the theme that I'm using, things should turn green when we have success and things should turn red when I have an error. And I would like my form input directive to apply the correct class for a given DOM element depending on the state of the form input that is inside. And in order to do that, my directive is going to have to look into the data structure associated with a form. Specifically, it's going to have to look at one of the properties associated with an input, like username, and look at a flag like invalid to see if this is true or false. And if $invalid ever changes, my directive is going to have to know about that and make changes to the DOM. So typically when you're inside of a directive and you need to know if something changed so that you can update the DOM, you use scope.watch. And that's what we can do here. Inside of the linking function, I will tell the scope to watch something. And ultimately what I want to watch is form subname dot $invalid. But instead of specifying that inside of an anonymous function here in scope.watch, I want to call a function. I'll call it watcher4. And this function will return a function that I can give to scope that will establish the watch. So I want a watcher for this form and specifically this name inside the form. So this is another way to use scope.watch. Quite commonly, you'll see people use scope.watch and they specify an expression as a string for the first parameter. But you can also specify a function with the first parameter, and whenever the return value from that function changes, Angular will invoke the second function, which typically applies the DOM updates or exercises whatever logic you need to do when something changes. We will get to that one next. For right now, let me build watcher4. That is a function that takes a form and a name, and it has to return a function that I give to Angular. So inside this function, let's make sure that we have a name and that this form that I can index into it by name, or that the form has a property with that name, and if it does, I will return form with that name and the invalid flag. Otherwise, just return undefined, that's fine. All I really care about is if the return value changes, because then Angular will call my second function, which I'm going to use a similar technique and say build me an updater for this element. And now updater4 has a similar pattern. It's going to return a function that I pass into watch. So updater4 is a function that takes an element wrapped with JQLite and returns a function. There will be a value passed to this function. Angular will pass whatever value the watcher returns into this function whenever it changes. So essentially, I will be getting a flag that tells me if the input has an error. So if we has an error, I will need to add the appropriate Bootstrap classes to indicate an error. Otherwise, I need to indicate success. So on the element, let's first make sure that we remove any hasSuccess class here, and then add a class that indicates there is an error. Otherwise, we just do the reverse. I need to remove any hasError class and add a hasSuccess class. So to summarize that bit of code, what we've done is we have set up a scope.watch. This watch is going to look at the invalid flag for a given form input, and whenever it changes, we will call the updater function, which will apply one of the appropriate Bootstrap classes. Let's save everything, come back and refresh our page, and I can see right off the bat that the label and help text for username is red because it's a required field and there's nothing there. Same with email address. But if I start typing inside of here, not only does the message go away, but my label text turns green, and that's a good indication to the user that things are working. So even though we used Bootstrap, this is an approach that you can use to apply your specific classes to the DOM elements that you want to style depending on success or failure of validation rules. Now there is one area of our form that doesn't behave correctly. We'll look at that in the next clip and also fix the problem.